Nature and Discipline. Two Sufis were agreeing that almost the whole of life was a struggle between nature and discipline, and how there had to be a third course, directed study, which avoided either while allowing both to operate. A certain student, anxious to learn but schooled in the false theories of mere tonguesters, said, "First, why can discipline alone, or nature alone, not lead to knowledge? Second, how can you show that so much of human life and time is wasted in the interplay of the two?" The Sufis only answered, "We shall demonstrate this to you when the time is ripe." After a time, the Sufis asked the student to accompany them on a journey. Before they set off, the first Sufi said, privately, to the young man, "I shall take a bag of dried dates, to allow for the needs of nature, which demands that the body be nourished with food." The second Sufi, also privately, said to him, "I shall show you how nature is defied by training." They traveled far, and whenever the first Sufi became hungry, the second Sufi asked him a question. The first time it was, "Who is that man over there?" Now the first Sufi, from politeness, had to put the date out of his mouth so that he could answer, even though, in this case, it was only to say, "I do not remember who he is." This happened 3 times. The second time, when asked, "What is the name of that village?" the first Sufi said, "I do not know." The third time, when asked, "How far have we still to go?" he answered, "I have not calculated it." Eventually they arrived at a spot where a beautiful girl was sitting by a well, where she had been drawing water. The second Sufi said, "I shall go and talk to her. You stay here and whistle if her people appear to take her back to her village, for they do not like strangers talking to their womenfolk hereabouts." So the student and the first Sufi stayed on guard. They watched while their companion spoke to the girl, and then, just as she was beginning to smile at him, the first Sufi whistled. The second Sufi came running back, asking, "What is it?" The first Sufi said, "I have just remembered the name of that man you asked me about on the road. His name was Halim." "How dare you trouble me at a time like this?" cried the second Sufi, and he went back to the girl. Presently, when the man and the girl were deep in conversation, the first Sufi whistled again, and again the other man came running. "What is it?" he asked. "That village you wondered about. It was called Ninjil." "Why don't you leave me alone?" asked the other indignantly. And he went back to the girl. The watchers could just see in the twilight that the young woman was laughing at something which the second Sufi had said, when the first Sufi whistled a third time. At first he did not want to leave the girl, but the second Sufi could not take the risk of being caught by her kinsfolk, so he came back running. As soon as he reached them, the first Sufi said, "I have just worked out that we are 3/4 the way along on our journey." At that moment the 3 men saw that the villagers had arrived at the well, and were taking the girl away with them. Then the 2 Sufis turned to the student and said in unison, "Now do you see the problems and the time taken, and the uselessness of the struggle between nature and discipline?" Overdose. Question: why, and how, is it that Sufi writings seem to show intense spirituality at times, and then, at other times, what looks like the reverse? Sufi teachers will seemingly preach deep religious concepts at one moment, and then be found removing emotional attitudes? I should have thought that that was quite obvious. Apparently it is not, so I will tell you. Here is an analogy. If a lifeguard jumps into the water and fishes out a man who is drowning, does this imply any criticism of the art of swimming? If the lifeguard reverses the swimming process, by bringing the man back to land and keeping him out of the water and the water out of him, does this mean that the lifeguard does not teach swimming or advocate being in the water?
Your problem is that the Sufis can see when there is an overdose of something, and they know what to do about it. But a doctor treating an overdose should not be mistaken for a man who disapproves of medicine. At one moment he administers a medicine, at another he works against the motive of medicine.
What I regard as most illuminating about this question is that it has to be asked at all, because, by asking it, the questioner has shown how deficient and unobjective is the background of information and conceptions which are his only endowment. Monarch and artist. It is related among the wise that there was once an emperor who desired a piece of calligraphy to hang upon a wall. He asked 7 of his advisors as to who could execute it, and they recommended a certain superb penman, who produced very little, though all his work was supremely excellent. "See what he can do," said the ruler, and so the 7 visited the famous man in his studio. He accepted the commission, promising that the work would be ready as soon as possible. After several months without hearing from the artist, the courtiers went to his house to see how he was progressing. Evenings with Idris Shah. "I have not started yet," said the man, "because I have to go through a period of meditation to prepare myself to fulfill a royal command." When the delegation, afraid that the monarch might call for the picture at any time, called upon their man again, this time 3 months later, he merely said, "I have not yet started, I am purging my mind of unnecessary thought, through reveries." Finally, the grandees, hovering between awe of this man's amazing and impressive discipline and a growing conviction that they could be punished at any moment if their master suddenly remembered their task and asked for the work, arrived at the artist's door to have the matter out with him for the last time. No less than 3 years had passed, they found him ready, and they saw that he was seated at a drawing board, with a clean piece of paper before him. As they watched, he raised his pen and applied it to the surface. In less time than it takes to tell, the most beautiful design which any of them had seen was seen to be inscribed. Ecstatically gathering up this treasure, the visitors showered gold upon the artist and hastened to the palace. They went directly to the hall of audience, where they found the emperor sitting, resplendently attired. Evenings with Idris Shah. As if for a special occasion, sitting on his throne and surrounded by the aristocrats, the military commanders, the ministers and ambassadors, governors of provinces and other high officials of the realm. The 7 emissaries took up their ceremonial positions in due order of seniority and distinction. The emperor, as if reading their thoughts, said, "Gentlemen, I hope that you have been able to bring us the work of the master calligrapher, a desire for whose possession was expressed to you some years ago." Astonished at the coincidence, and at the same time delighted to be able to discharge their trust, the 7 advisors stepped forward as one, their leader unrolling the breathtaking masterwork for all to see. When the gasps of wonderment at the beauty of the object had somewhat subsided, the ruler thanked his faithful retainers and asked them to withdraw, with the picture, to an adjoining chamber, where they were to receive their rewards. A hidden orchestra played sweet music and rare foods and drinks were brought as the advisors were ushered to their luxurious divans by no less an individual than the Lord High Chamberlain, who handed them sacks of precious jewels and accorded them every honor. Suddenly, however, the 7 men noticed, suspended on the wall of this room and revealed by a curtain which was slowly parting, a piece of calligraphy which appeared identical to the one which they had obtained with so much effort and anxiety, and which had involved such time and so much dedication on the part of the artist. Their mouths opening and shutting like fish under water, they severally gasped, "Who, how, why, what, when?" "If you are inquiring about that perfect work of art, O splendid and utterly wise counselors," said the Chamberlain, "know that it was dashed off in a matter of seconds by our Lord His Imperial Majesty, some 3 years ago, while illustrating approximately the kind of work which he hoped might be obtained from a competent artist, to embellish one of his rooms. But it took us 3 years of suffering to have this one made," spluttered the leader of the advisors. "Furthermore, it required the artist to discipline himself with the utmost rigor, with fasting and purges, vegetarianism and mantrams, recitations and readings, concentration and contemplation." "I rather fancy," said their host, "that the artist was disciplining himself at your expense and at the expense of His Majesty." Now the monarch, on the other hand, had already so prepared himself and had gone through the necessary deprivations, so that nobody was exploited when he desired to exercise his own art. The artist may be a great one, but he is still learning. Our ruler already has learnt. Unknown capacities of man. Question the Western psychologists, and here I have in mind Sigmund Freud especially, have given us interesting and operable tools for observation. Many of their theories are in question, but the tools remain. If I see someone constantly avoiding something, for instance, I can infer from it that he has had some early experience which caused this aversion. I can understand another person when he is using rationalization, because Freud has given me the explanation and the procedure to approach this question. The advantage is that it not only explains the other person's behavior to me but also enables me to become less annoyed or inefficient in my dealing with him. Can we find similar advantages in Eastern, especially Sufi, observation and learning, which can be applied to day-to-day activities? A. It would be extremely peculiar, I think, if you could not find such things. Whether you are prepared to use them is the question which interests me most. Question: may I have an example of one such technique? A. One of the most useful is the fact that you may pick up from another person, without his being aware that you are doing so, or that he can do it, information which is being received by his mind. To clarify, there may be a subject of mutual interest in which someone is asking you questions, and you may get the answer because you can register his awareness of the answer, while he cannot himself do so. Question: is this something like mediumship? A. Only very slightly like it, because in the cases of mediumship generally investigated in the West, there is a great deal of belief that messages are coming from the dead, and also too much inefficiency. For example, the messages are more often than not completely banal and serve only social purposes. Question: do you mean that there is a great deal of information in the air and that this can be obtained through meetings of people, and that people are almost always unaware of this? A. Yes. Question: what prevents people making use of this technique? A. The same thing that prevents people from understanding and using mediumistic procedures. In the first place, they are emotionally attracted and are taking social satisfactions from the situation, which prevents it working accurately. In the second, they cannot detach their greed and self-centeredness from it, so they only want things which they desire. They do not want information or experience for its own sake. So the element behind this phenomenon simply yields whatever it can under these most limiting circumstances. Question: so people should approach this matter more sincerely and genuinely? A. Exactly. Question: and this form of communication does not operate without that sincerity? A. This form of communication is operating all the time. People are not aware of it. If it were not working, man would not have the information and relative efficiency which he has. In the absence of sincerity, the lack of greed will allow much to happen which will help the individual, even though he will not be able to say how this happened, and will therefore put all sorts of choices and happenings down to chance, luck, and judgment. The importance of grouping. The right people at the right place at the right time, zaman, makan, has many reasons. One of the most important of these is that if you group people wrongly, you exaggerate their undesirable characteristics. Although not so rapid nor so publicly visible, you can get a similar effect to the proneness of a mass of people to become a mob. Just as a random collection of people assembled around an oversimplified issue easily becomes a mindless mob, irrational and even destructive, so may people collected together, without adequate preparation and safeguards, become a corroding factor in spiritual matters. They may damage themselves or others. Familiar examples are the abnormal enmities and exaggerated behavior of members of coteries, whether these be scholars or professionals, in many societies, both current and ancient, as well as the numerous religious groupings which go sour. Although this behavior abounds, narrow-mindedness, poor understanding, lack of generosity to others outside the in-group, few people, it seems, realize that it is so widespread. Fewer still have bothered to see it as a matter of study. And yet fewer seem to imagine, when you mention it to them, that it is avoidable by planning. At the best, in my experience, such people merely assume that it cannot happen to them. And yet, by not looking at it, how many opportunities of learning about this thing are missed? If people won't look, merely telling them that something is there will not suffice. The purpose of talking about it, then, is not to add to the stock of formal information on the subject, it is rather to stimulate curiosity among whoever hears or reads, so that he may make this a verified part of his own experience. Experience teaches. Question: what is to prevent people from choosing the best ideas from all kinds of teachings, and adopting them? A. What prevents ignorant people doing this is their incapacity. What prevents insightful ones is lack of necessity. People who know how to do it do not have to attempt it, because when one has this knowledge the activity is superfluous, because one then has access to the material which corresponds best to the time, place, and people, without having to synthesize. Synthesizers are the half-ignorant. Question: what is to prevent people from choosing the best ideas from all kinds of teachings and adopting them? A. What prevents ignorant people doing this is their incapacity. What prevents insightful ones is lack of necessity. People who know how to do it do not have to attempt it, because when one has this knowledge the activity is superfluous, because one then has access to the material which corresponds best to the time, place, and people, without having to synthesize. Synthesizers are the half-ignorant. Question: what is to prevent people from choosing the best ideas from all kinds of teachings and adopting them? A. What prevents ignorant people doing this is their incapacity. What prevents insightful ones is lack of necessity. People who know how to do it do not have to attempt it, because when one has this knowledge the activity is superfluous, because one then has access to the material which corresponds best to the time, place, and people, without having to synthesize. Synthesizers are the half-ignorant. Such workings of the human mind, in the three modes just given, can be isolated and examined by taking them separately and clothing them in individual human terms. This is one of the functions of narrative instruction. The materials for this study are almost everywhere, but they lack, in most societies, an organizer. Let us take 3 anecdotes and examine the working of the various disabilities. First, we may say that people fail to do things towards learning because they are under the domination of a belief or an institution, which inculcates a habit of only thinking in one way. The first story concerns a man who lives in a totalitarian country. He is sitting in the dentist's chair. The dentist says, "Open your mouth." "What?" answers the patient. "And get shot?" This caricature shows the literalness of the effect on people of a dominating institution or idea. In societies, for instance, where the tradition is that people cannot know more about themselves because that is a reserved area confined to, say, priests or seers, the subconscious belief is that one must not attempt to go further. This behavior is sometimes imagined to be duty or proper behavior. It is useful enough in the right place, but positively disabling where flexibility is needed. The official barriers may be institutions, traditions, or social norms, producing what contemporary psychologists call an inhibition. Mullah Nasruddin, it is related, was drowned, and an angel came to put him through the customary examination. "How did it happen?" he asked. "I was crossing from France to England," said the mullah. "And the boat sank?" The mullah was amazed. "You mean there is a boat," he said. This primitive sense, that one wants something and therefore must be able to get it or do it, lurks in everyone, and is an integral component of the secondary self. Again, it is useful in the right place, for it enables effort to be made, but it is disastrous when it operates randomly, as the mullah found out. The third characteristic is that of habit, excellent in its own place, but cripplingly limiting where it will not work. The tale which covers this aspect of the mind's working is no less amusing for being a modern hybrid. It concerns a dedicated organizer of industrial action, shown into the presence of a spiritual master. He put his hands over his ears. When he was leaving, a disciple said, "You won't get very far that way." "I don't care," said the visitor, "I'm on strike." Conditioning, habit, proves counterproductive where it operates automatically and again, lacks flexibility. So, in this way, we can observe the composite influence which effectively cuts people off from knowledge, a self which, when used for certain purposes, is excellent, but whose operation may be useless and even harmful when applied to areas which are irrelevant to it. Thus the 3 elements, duty, ignorance, and habit, in the absence of a switching mechanism turn the individual into a prisoner. No wonder he constantly asks how he can escape. It is a little less obvious why, in trying to escape, he turns to one or other of the methods which entrap him as means to freedom.